I'm going to be talking with you all today about KOTS under the hood. So we're going to be looking at some of the internals of kind of how KOTS works and how it deploys an application. Um, and let's see, get the slideshow going. So if metrics madness didn't get you on your feet, then KOTS under the hood is about to do it for you. So we've got about 25 minutes. And the question that we're trying to answer here is, how do my replicated custom resources, my Kubernetes manifest, my Helm charts, all the stuff that I put into a replicated release, how does all of that get combined and ultimately get deployed as an application in my customer's environment? So we're going to talk a little bit at the start about kustomize, because that's a really important tool that we use here to accomplish this. And then we're going to spend a pretty good amount of our time in a hands-on demo inside of the admin console, showing you the different stages that KOTS goes through as it deploys an application, and hopefully giving you a little more transparency into that process, as well as hopefully some tips so that if you need to debug something, you'll be better equipped to do that. So we'll look at how kustomize is used for Kubernetes manifests and for Helm charts. We'll look at how the Kubernetes manifests get deployed. We'll look at how the Helm charts get deployed. And specifically for Helm charts, we're going to be looking at charts where use Helm install is set to true. So if you're familiar with our Helm chart support, this is what we call native Helm within the admin console. And that's our more recent Helm chart support. So we're specifically going to be looking at how those Helm charts get handled by the admin console. And then we'll wrap up with a summary with some of those things we saw as part of the hands-on demo. So we'll start by talking about kustomize real quick. This is straight from its website, but kustomize is a template-free way to customize application configuration that simplifies the use of off-the-shelf applications. So basically what kustomize does, it's able to look at a Kubernetes manifest and augment it. It can add, remove, or update configuration options. So you're able to change specific parts of your manifests without having to fork them and have different versions. So like this is very significant for KOTS because you're trying to deploy your application into heterogeneous customer environments that are going to have different requirements. So being able to use a single release, but change that release so that it works in each customer environment is very important. So that's how KOTS uses kustomize, to take that one release and manipulate it so that it works across all of your customer deployments. Now, why do we use kustomize? Well, KOTS uses kustomize for a couple of different things. First, it's going to create and configure image pull secrets. So if you have private images either stored in your own private registry or the replicated registry, or if your customer is air-gapped and they're using their own private registry, then KOTS uses kustomize to create and configure pull secrets to give access to those images. It also is used to rewrite image names. So, your manifests are going to have your image names in them. Those might be to private registries that you're using. And KOTS will rewrite those images to use the proxy service or to use the customer's private registry that they have configured. Or if you're using custom domains, which is a newer feature that we have, it's going to rewrite those image names to use a custom domain as well. It's also used for adding labels for backup. So if you use our snapshots feature, then kustomize will add labels to all of the right resources so that it knows what to back up as part of a backup and restore procedure. And then lastly, we won't touch on this too much, but you can use kustomize to perform last mile customization. So if you're at a customer deployment and you need to make some changes that are just specific to that customer that KOTS isn't doing automatically for you, you're able to use kustomize yourself to perform that last mile customization. So let's get into a hands-on demo to really kind of walk through this in the admin console and see what that looks like. So I'm going to head over to this View Files tab to show you kind of the steps that KOTS takes here when it's setting up and deploying a release. So we'll start here with the upstream directory. Or actually, let me start even before this and just mention that I've got an Nginx Helm chart that I included as part of this application. And I've got a config option, and I just put this text garbage in there so that it's easy to remember. And this is going to come up as part of the demo. So we'll see where this config option gets plugged in later. So just remember garbage as the config option that we're looking for here as we dig into the some of these internals. So Upstream is the first directory here. So this is the first stage that KOTS goes through. And upstream is just basically a mirror of all the files that you included as part of your release. So this should be everything that you saw in your release without modification. So you've got like your custom resources, like your pre-flight checks or your config resource. You've got Helm charts, and they're still packaged up as an archive at this stage. And you've got your deployments and things like that. And if you're using template functions or anything like that, that stuff is all in here too. So for this example, I've got a config map that I'm ultimately going to map a license field value, the customer name, to this part of the config map. So all these template functions, all of this stuff is here in its unmodified state. And the only additional thing is that you have this user data directory, and this has a couple files that are specific to the user. So this is some of the stuff that's going to get combined with your release to deploy to this particular customer. So you've got their config values. So you can see I put that garbage value in there. So there's my nginx config, the value is garbage. I've got my license. So this is all of my particular stuff. So we know customer name is going to get used eventually. That's GKE online. And then a couple of other specific files like installation basically talks about which images are private, which ones aren't private, add some other information. So that's all user specific stuff. So upstream's pretty easy to handle because that's just a mirror of the release that you've created. Base is where things start to get interesting. So base is where these files actually get rendered. So let's talk about the Kubernetes manifests first. So these manifests are going to get rendered with any replicated template functions that you included. So we remember in upstream, we had a config map, and we were trying to map a license field value into that config map. Well, once we come into base, we see that that's happened. So that customer name, GKE online, is now plugged into this config map. And so that's going to be true across all these files. Any of your replicated template functions are rendered and resolved inside of base. And that's pretty much it for the Kubernetes manifests at this stage. There's also a customization file that is just basically including a list of all of the files here. So this isn't going to be used at this point in time, but in our next step, when we use kustomize, these are going to be all the files that will run kustomize against. And this is just every file that's in here. So all, 7 of these files are present right here. Now for charts, there's a little bit more to it. It's very similar, but we've got an extra step. So in the first place, we are rendering our replicated template functions. So if you look at a release, and if you're familiar with our Helm chart custom resource, this is how you map things from your config or from the license into the values file for a specific Helm chart. So in this case, I've got replicated.junk, and that's where I'm going to put my config option, which was garbage. So this is how I'm going to link up a value from my config and plug it into my Helm chart. So at this stage, we would expect this value to get resolved. Okay. So coming back into my chart, we include the values file here, and you can see that if I search for replicated, my garbage value has gotten plugged in right there. So that replicated template function got resolved into the Helm chart resource. And then on top of that, we did the replicated templating, but we also ran Helm template to template out all of the templates for our Helm chart as well. So if we were to look at this Helm chart before we had templated it, there would be a bunch of Helm templating inside of these templates, right? Like these have include, if, end, all of this stuff is my Helm templating. And we can see here that we're trying to put that value into another config map with nginx config. So inside of base, we're doing the Helm, the replicated template functions, but we're also doing Helm template to bring all that together into the Helm chart. So if we look at these templates, we can see that none of them have Helm templating in them anymore. They've all been rendered using Helm template. And so if we look at config map, we can see here that that garbage value got plugged in here using Helm templating. So .values, .replicated, .junk got inserted right here. So that's what base does. Base is just going to render all of the different templating across both replicated and Helm templating and give you what are effectively deployable manifests now for Kubernetes and for Helm. But we haven't done any of the special customizations yet. So these are deployable, but we haven't made any of those user-specific changes that we want to make for their environment. So at that point, we're going to move on to the overlays directory. Now there's two sections to overlays. One is downstreams and one is midstream. So we're not going to talk too much about downstream, so I'll just mention it real quick. This is basically the directory where you can provide your own customizations. So if a customer needs to change something on the fly, they could provide their own customization to do that. We've got some documentation on that I can share later, and this click here button right here gives you a little bit of a description of how to accomplish that too. But that's not something that is always used. That's kind of optional. So we're going to focus on midstream because this is the stuff that KOTS always does as part of your deployment. So this is where the actual customizations occur. And we talked about earlier a few things that kustomize does. And this file is going to lay those things out. So basically what this file is saying is on all of the files in base, we want to perform these customizations. So one is adding this annotation to all of the resources. But then we're going to manipulate our images. So we talked about how image rewrites is a part of what kustomize does. So in this case, anywhere that we see this image, so registry.replicated.com/AlexGuestbook/Redis, that image is going to get rewritten to use the custom domain that I provided as part of this release. So registry.alexparker.info is my custom domain for the replicated registry. So kustomize is used to rewrite all of these images so that they use that custom domain. And the same thing is going to be true if you have a private image that needs to be proxied through the proxy service. So this is a private image that's stored in Google's artifact registry. And because it was determined it's a private image, the customer's not able to pull it, then it gets rewritten to use our proxy service so that it'll get pulled through that proxy service instead. So kustomize is going to do all of that image rewriting. But then there's a couple other things that it's going to do. So let's start down here with secret.yaml. So we talked about earlier that one of the things kustomize does is also creating and configuring image pull secrets. So this step is where we're going to create that secret. So we've got two secrets in this secret.yaml file that are going to get created. And both of them have the same credentials, but they're used for different purposes. This one we won't talk about too much because this is used by KOTS to pull its own images if they've been pushed to like a customer's private registry or something like that. But for your application images, this is the secret that is created that's going to be relevant for your private images. So this contains credentials to the proxy service and the replicated registry. And so this secret is going to get created in the cluster in the right namespace so that your deployments and stateful sets, all of the pods that are running, can pull their images from either the proxy service or the replicated registry with the right credentials. So kustomize in this step is going to create that secret. But then that secret needs to be used by your appropriate resources so that they have the right credentials to pull those images. So that's what this pull secrets file here does. This is another customization that is going to look at all the different, deploy. In this case, I have a bunch of deployments, but it could be other things too that need those pull secrets, and it's going to plug them in the right spot. So this is my front end deployment, and this is just telling kustomize that at spec.template.spec.image pull secrets, I want you to add that Alex guestbook registry pull secret that we just created. And that's going to give this front-end deployment the right credentials to pull its images. And the same thing is true for the Redis follower and the Redis leader images that are part of this application. So that makes sure that not only do we have the pull secret, but it's attached to the right resources so that they can pull the right images. So we've gotten through our image rewrites to make sure we're pulling from the right registries. We've created a pull secret and made sure that our resources have access to that pull secret so they can use those credentials. So the last thing we'll talk about is the backup label transformer. And this is a pretty simple one. This one's just relevant if you're using our snapshots feature. We want to make sure that the right labels are on the resources that need to get backed up as part of that snapshot, that backup and restore. So backup label transformer it's a bit longer, but basically all this is saying is that these two labels right here, Alex Guestbook is the app slug, and then backup is Valero. These two labels should get applied to all of the relevant resources. So this is going to apply it to all of those resources. And then any pod templates within there, like if it's in a replication controller or a deployment or a replica set, etc., those pod templates should also have those labels added at this path. So this, you might only follow that 50%, but basically the gist there is just that all the things that should get backed up are going to get these labels so that Valero will know which things to back up when you use the backup and restore features. So that's all the customizations. And the same thing is true with your charts. So if you have Helm charts, all of these same customizations are happening. It's just that we put another customization file inside of that chart directory, and you've got its own secret, its own patches for pull secrets, its own patches for adding the right labels, etc. But this is just done on a per chart basis too. So I've only got one Helm chart here, but for each Helm chart, I would have my own customization file with all of these different pieces associated with it as well. So that's the midstream and the overlays directory. So that, again, overlays is where all that customization is happening. And finally, the rendered directory is one that we added recently to hopefully kind of increase some of this transparency and help people see what's happening and debug any issues they might have or things like that. But the rendered directory includes the full rendered manifests that are going to get deployed to your cluster. So these will have all the template function stuff from base. Those are all templated out already. All the customizations from overlays are going to be applied here. So we can see here, this is that secret that we created, the Alex Guestbook registry secret. That is right here. If we take, let's say, for example, our Redis follower deployment, we can see that our backup labels have been applied both on the deployment and on the template at the bottom. We can see that our image name got rewritten. So it was a private image from the Google artifact registry. Now it's been rewritten to proxy.replicated.com. And then finally, the image pull secret is added so that to pull from proxy, it's going to use this Alex Guestbook registry pull secret. So you can see that rendered has all of that stuff, all those manipulations we mentioned above are plugged in at this point. And the same thing is true for your charts. So all of these templates are going to have all of those manipulations made. And if we find a deployment here, there we go, we'll see the same things. We've got the pull secret that was created. We've got the labels, etc. So one thing I'll note, and this has confused some people, and that's part of why we wanted to do this presentation, but wanted to talk real quick now about that Helm chart handling to make sure that something's clear in this process. So you remember at base, we run Helm template, and that's going to template out, it's going to use the values file to template out all of your manifests with the right values. Then we do our customizations. So then we end up here, and these files all have the templating stuff already done. Like, that garbage value is already in here. There's no more templating left to be done. So basically what KOTS does at this point is it takes these templates and it effectively builds them back into a new chart that it's going to deploy. So I've had people recently saying, well, I did a Helm get values and I didn't see any values as part of my Helm chart when KOTS deploys it, which is confusing. And this is the reason for that, is because KOTS isn't just taking the Helm chart and doing a Helm install and passing the values in. Because of all the customization that it's doing, it's fully rendering that chart out and packaging it back up and then doing a Helm install on that. So there aren't any values to pass anymore because all those values have already been plugged in to your manifests inside of that chart. And we'll touch on this again in the overview just in case that wasn't totally clear. We'll go over that again. So that rendered directory is new, and hopefully that's going to be helpful if you are running into any issues and need to debug. This will let you see exactly the stuff that's going to get deployed to the customer's environment. All right, so that's it for the hands-on demo. So let's just do a quick overview on some of these things to nail down these concepts. So directory structure, upstream, that's just a mirror of what you had in your release. All the template functions are still there. All the custom resources are still there. And then you've also got that user data directory with the license, the config values, and stuff like that. Then base is where we process those files, render out all the template functions, and do Helm template to plug all the Helm values in. And we subtract any non-deployable files like the support bundle or the pre-flight checks. Those aren't present at this point because they're not going to get deployed to the cluster. Overlays is where the KOTS and user-defined customizations exist. So for KOTS, those are the image rewrites, the backup labels, the image pull secrets, all of that stuff. And then finally, rendered is the final rendered manifests that are going to get deployed to the cluster. So to recap how the Helm charts are handled, first, render the template functions in the values field of the Helm chart custom resource. So that's how you're going to map things from your config or your license into the values of the Helm chart. Then we run Helm template using both the values file from the chart itself and those values from the Helm chart custom resource that you templated in. And by running Helm template, we get a set of deployable manifests for that Helm chart. Then we perform the customized patching to add the pull secrets, rewrite the images, the backup labels, etc. Finally, repackage that as a new Helm chart, and then run Helm upgrade -i to install or upgrade the chart. So those are basically the steps on how this works. And again, I've got some docs that outlines this process that I can share if anyone needs to reread that or get a bit more information. And then finally, how does KOTS deploy both the Kubernetes manifests that are in your release and the Helm charts that are in your release? So first, it's going to look and see if there's any Kubernetes resources that aren't needed anymore. So like if you took something out of a release and that needs to get removed, then KOTS is going to delete that resource. Then it's going to do a kubectl apply and apply all of the fully rendered Kubernetes manifests that are provided as part of your release. And then it's going to install the Helm charts. And it does this sequentially. So one of them gets installed at a time. And they're installed in order based on weight. So there's a weight field, if you weren't familiar with that, for our Helm charts. So you can order them in case you need them to be processed in a particular order. So before I wrap up here, the last thing I'll mention is that we really want to improve how KOTS processes Helm charts. Some of the reasons that we want to do this is that we really want to use Helm directly to install the Helm chart instead of all of those manipulations. I talked about how at the end, there's no values file and we repackage it as a new chart and we deploy that. That's something we want to get away from and try to use Helm directly on the chart that you provide as part of your release, because it's going to increase transparency. It's going to increase debuggability. The idea is that if you have a chart, you should be able to run a Helm install on it. And if it works, then it's going to work inside of KOTS too, because KOTS is going to perform the same actions. It's not going to manipulate it and change it the way that it does today. And then ultimately, we want to be able to have a vendor use the same release for both a KOTS install and a Helm install. So we have a beta feature right now that lets you install Helm charts directly without needing to use KOTS. If you have customers that are very focused on Helm and want to install a Helm chart instead, we have a beta feature to enable that. And we want one release to be able to work for both of those installation methods. So this is something we're actively working on. And if you've experienced any of these issues, you want more transparency in the Helm process and whatnot, and you want to help us design that and give feedback, then please let me know, because we'd love to work with you to make some of those improvements so that they work for you as well. And the goal is that if it works with the Helm CLI, then it should work with KOTS too. So those should all work exactly the same. So I can check the, I can check the live storm. But if you've got questions, my email is alexp@replicated.com. You can find me on our Slack as well. Find this and end up with this crazy screen share nightmare here. Let's see. Does the Helm repackage step also happen with Helm native? So if you're referring to like the native Helm feature within KOTS, where like that type of handling of the Helm charts, then yes, it does repackage it as the last step. That I was talking specifically about native Helm, so it does happen there. And then we've also got someone asking, can we change base or upstream folder for config map changes? I might need a little bit more information on that one to understand. But I think if you want to make changes to the config map, if I'm understanding correctly, you can get in touch with me if you need to follow up. But generally speaking, if you want to make changes, then you're going to want to use template functions to template the right stuff into that config map. Or you could use the last mile customization with kustomize to accomplish the same thing.